But before we start the morning's program, we'd like to thank WealthSouth for presenting this series, and I invite Jeff Singer, Lending Manager, Growth Markets, Senior Vice President, to say a few words. Jeff?
Thank you, Carla. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spotlight Series Breakfast. We're excited to partner with Commerce Lexington and bring this to you. We continue to be in a virtual world, but I think that Commerce Lexington has done a fantastic job bringing us events through this challenging time, and we're glad to be a part of it. You may know WealthSouth. We've been in this market for a little over 7 years now, but we're a full-service commercial banking, wealth management, and institutional operation. We recently moved offices towards the end of last year, so we're now over on 106 West Vine Street. We'd love for you to come visit us at any time. But again, we're proud to partner with Commerce Lexington and glad to have this wonderful group of panelists to discuss diversity, inclusion, et cetera, with us this morning. So thank you so much for being here and joining us, and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for WealthSouth's support of this series. We're going to get right to it this morning. I'm going to introduce our panel. We've got a great group of panelists here this morning with us. Ray Daniels, he's president of Equity Solutions Group, which is a strategic sourcing firm that has an emphasis on expense reduction while also ensuring competitive participation from qualified, diverse businesses. Ray also, as you probably know, serves as Commerce Lexington's board chair. Sheri Depp is Director, Talent Management, Diversity, and Corporate Citizenship for Lexmark International, and she'll talk about some of the diversity initiatives that the company has recently developed. Next, we have Mark Hill, who's Vice President and Lexington Region Leader for Messer Construction Company, which has done some great work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for some time. And finally, we have Will James, who's co-owner of Jam Distribution, which he joined after a successful 30-year career with Toyota, where he finished there as president for Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky. We're going to get right to our questions, and if we have time, we'll move to questions that you all have provided for us. So the first question really is for all of you, and that is, what are some of the strategies, approaches, or initiatives that a company or organization can utilize to improve diversity and inclusion in their workplace? Who wants to kick us off?
Well, why don't I go ahead and start?
Great.
First of all, good morning to everyone. I'm glad to have an opportunity to share a couple of comments with you. But to answer your question specifically, and I hope I'm coming through okay.
You are.
I'm going to talk back or look back at how we started our diversity journey at Toyota over 25 years ago. Initially, we started with the development of a small diversity advisory team, a team of middle management folks that, basically covered the breadth of the entire organization that could come together and really talk about where we as a company were and where do we think we as a company should be. So first, I would start with a small group of people, diverse group of people that can start talking honestly about where the company is and where you think the company needs to go. Then move on to training for everyone to let everybody know exactly what it is that you want to try to achieve. You can utilize things like surveys, and then get to a point to where you actually start setting targets towards the long-term goals for the organization. There's a lot of other things I can say. There's a lot of specific initiatives I can talk about, but I think starting this conversation, we have to start with the basics, and those are some of the strong basics.
Great, thanks, Will, and hopefully we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of those details with additional questions. Sheri, how about you?
Yep. So what I would add to what Will has stated, like Toyota, Lexmark has for about 20 years really kind of started small, and that having that leadership involvement is incredibly important. And the other thing is having network groups, employee groups, where you bring people who haven't always had a voice, and you bring those folks together so that when you bring that group of diversity, you have different viewpoints. You understand from them what it feels like to be in a particular group in the workplace so that we can start working on the goals. What are the goals and how do we make everybody feel like they're included and everybody feel like they can reach their highest potential? And you do that by listening, but also challenging.
Great, thanks, Sheri. Ray, we'll go to you next.
I think that to build on Will and Sheri, I would say, as Sheri mentioned, you got to have goals. You got to have a starting point and an ending point, or you at least need to know where you're going. I think the other thing is you have to have ownership, right? So somebody, an individual or a group, has to own the process. Eventually, there's an accountability loop in any company, and I've been a director of diversity. And that accountability loop is closed by who owns the process, who owns the goals, who owns the training, and so who owns the strategic plan of the actual inclusion plan. And I think finally, it has to come from the top. A lot of things happen inside of an organization from the bottom organically, but on the leadership side, the seriousness of equity and inclusion has to start from the top. So that person or those individuals have to have a conduit or an opportunity or a direct report right to the C-suite, so to speak. And that's where the influence really comes from. And that's where the accountability is.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Mark, we'll close out this question with you.
Yeah, and I've got a very similar answer, and there's probably a reason for that. You know, it's very common what everyone's saying, but I think you've got to decide where and how you want to make an impact, first of all, with your organization. And again, as Ray just said, it's got to start at the top, and it did for our company. And it was always a focus for our company. I've been with Messer for a little over 30 years now, but we got serious about it when we went and hired Stan Williams and a department that we could really focus on it and support all of us in making sure that we were doing better with minority inclusion and economic inclusion. And then, as also was mentioned, is just setting some goals and then holding yourself and everyone accountable to meeting those goals is extremely important.
Thanks, Mark. Will, these next couple questions are going to dive a little bit deeper into the Toyota experience. So first of all, tell us a little bit about how your experience as you worked your way up the ranks at Toyota, how did they shape your approach and your efforts as president to cultivate diversity initiatives within the plant? And what are some of the initiatives that worked well?
Well, you know, first of all, let me say, I was fortunate enough to start from the very beginning with Toyota, one of the first 300 employees hired. So as I progressed up through the organization and we got to a point in the mid-90s, and we started talking about things like diversity and inclusion. Back then, nobody called it diversity and inclusion. We just call it respect. You know, how do you build respect? I knew all of the members of the senior management team, and they all knew me. And as a result, I was selected as one of the members of our initial diversity advisory team. That small group of folks that could actually talk openly and honestly about where we were and what gaps we felt that we had. So having that relationship with the senior management team gave us all some credibility to be able to talk openly and honestly and to really share the gaps that we had in the organization. As a result, we put together a strategy of how we were going to overcome those gaps. And it started initially with training for everyone. It started at the senior team. Then we brought it down to the floor supervisors. And as was mentioned by others, you know, we then started assessing where we were in our hiring, where we were in our retention, you know, where some of the problems obviously were bubbling to the top, the related issues back in that day, and started putting together specific plans around those. Now, some of the plans that we focused on was hiring, making sure that we had diverse hiring, and we had programs set up where you had to interview a diverse slate of members for any positions of promotion in the company. We had targets for retention. We looked specifically at areas that had diverse employees leaving at a higher rate than in other areas, which would highlight many times an opportunity or an issue with a supervisor. We looked at spending. You know, were we a part of the solution or were we a part of the problem? Because we felt that it was important that we not only work on respect and inclusion, although we didn't call it that then, internally, but we also look at what we're doing externally in the community. You know, are we a part of the problem or are we a part of the solution? How can we be a part of the solution? And as I rose through the organization, I was just given more and more opportunity to kind of lead this initiative, becoming the champion for diversity at Toyota, not only in Georgetown, but at all of our plants in North America, sales, marketing, design, the whole bit. And that little model that we used in Georgetown, we grew it across all of the manufacturing plants, sales organization, design, marketing, and as a result, Toyota has one composite diversity and inclusion structure and plan now that really isn't a whole lot different than what we started with in the late 90s.
And you may have just answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway and see if you have anything to add. But how do you foster impactful diversity and inclusion in an environment as large as Toyota? Was the success having a model small and then growing it and being consistent, or is there anything else that you wanted to add about that?
Ray made a point earlier about the tone at the top. When we made it absolutely clear that this was going to be the way that we operated in our company, I'm talking specifically Georgetown now, that beginning network, when we made it absolutely clear to everyone that we would not tolerate any forms of discrimination or bigotry or disrespect, I think people started getting the message, and then the things that they saw us do when there were obvious issues and how we immediately focused on trying to address it, set that tone. So it all starts with setting that tone and then doing what you said you would do. Now, Sheri mentioned something that I think was especially important, pulling together our small diversity teams. We had the African-American team, we had the women's network, we had the gay lesbian network. We had a variety of these different networks, and that gave them a safe space to be able to talk amongst themselves about the types of issues or policies or practices in our company that they felt were discriminating against them. And then we set up a network where they could provide those concerns through a process, through our human resources group. So we would assess those issues, and we actually changed policies because sometimes you write policies, you don't even think about the things that you're doing that are becoming a part of the problem for diverse employees. But once they brought those issues up to us, we actually took the time to go in and change policies to try to put those things behind us. So it took years of progression to actually make these things materialize and make the company as strong as it is today. But it all starts with, you know, being honest, open and honest with yourself, and setting up an avenue where every employee feels that they can be open and honest too. Now, this thing takes time additionally, because you constantly bring in new people into the organization. So you've got to kind of keep that training going. But the bottom line is giving everybody that opportunity to feel comfortable to say how they really feel and to say how they really are being impacted, and give them that chance to feel good about their chances that if they work towards a common goal and objective in a respectful way, that they can rise to their highest potential.
Thank you, Will. Mark, Messer has several programs and initiatives that are focused on economic inclusion. Could you briefly describe some of those and also talk a little bit about why it's important for Messer to be doing this?
Yeah, sure can. For us, economic inclusion really is a three-pronged approach: supplier diversity, workforce diversity, and community engagement. So I'll briefly hit on all three of those. First of all, with supplier diversity, and that's really just broadening our involvement with certified minority and women-owned companies, and now here recently veteran-owned companies as well. In 2020, we had in the Lexington region, we spent a little over $11.5 million with certified MWB companies, and that was roughly about 12% of our spend, and it was up about $2 million from the previous year. So very proud of that. And then just looking company-wide, even better results, we were at around 18% and spent $278 million with minority companies. Right now in the Central Bank Center project, which is our big project going on right now, we've got almost 14% spend, and that's on a lump sum bid project. So we're very proud of that. And it was something that we had to work really hard at. We've got a database of over 200 diverse subcontractors and suppliers that we touch on, and we continue to try to grow those. We also have a similar approach to what Will mentioned in our majority contractors. We've developed an expectation for them that they're going to bring to the game minority inclusion. And that was a stretch and a little bit of a challenge starting out, but that expectation is there now after a few years, and folks are doing well with that. And then the sort of final piece of supplier diversity is continuing to partner with folks like Commerce Lexington and doing outreach sessions and making sure that minority contractors know what projects we have coming up. So that's sort of the supplier diversity. Workforce diversity is really just making sure that we're doing a better job of recruiting, retaining minority and diverse individuals. And we've really come a long way with this just in the last few years. And one way we've done that is we've developed some scholarships that's for minority students across all 10 of our regions with different universities. Here in the Lexington region, we've been providing for several years now a scholarship for minority students at UK, and now just here recently have started the same thing for Berea College for minority students. We've continued to recruit at historically Black universities, and that's made a big difference because it is a challenge in the civil engineering construction management field, and so it's something that we've really seen. We've increased our diverse hires by 200% since 2017 for some of the reasons that I just mentioned. And then sort of the final piece is community engagement, and really just making sure that we're partnering with organizations that are focusing on the minority inclusion, like Commerce Lexington. To name a few, the Black Male Working Academy is something that we're a part of, the Lexington Minority and Women Contractor Training Program, the Urban League, and then on the craft side with Southside Technical Center that we've been able to recruit some of our very good minority craft folks.
Great, thanks so much. Sheri, Lexmark just recently published a diversity, equity, and inclusion 3-year strategic plan. Tell us about that process and how it will drive DEI efforts at the company.
Yes, so we have had a structure in place, as I said, for DEI for years, and we have a strong network of our employee groups. We call them diversity network groups, and we have a very strong council, and we've been able to expand globally our diversity efforts. And we've had a diversity mission statement for years and talked about our goals, but in the past 18 months, we realized that we really needed a document that laid out exactly what we were looking to do and also gave our employees globally an idea of the kinds of things we were already doing. Like many companies, there are many ways that you interface with your, the suppliers and looking for diversity, inclusion in suppliers. All of the community involvement, our diversity network groups are absolutely our key to community interface. And, diversity is really a part of everything that we do in the community. So we brought together our Diversity Advisory Council and we defined what our goals were. And so we have 3 DEI goals. The first one is to ensure leadership commitment. We want leaders to demonstrate their commitment, and they need to have accountability for both modeling the behaviors that advance DEI as well as holding others accountable. We want to cultivate a inclusive and supportive culture, and we want that culture to really lead to authentic empowerment and participation in a really sense of belonging for all employees. And then third, which we've heard consistently, build and maintain a diverse workforce. So how do we identify, attract, and retain a pipeline of diverse and qualified candidates, as well as being able to, hold on to our high potential and our workers that we don't want to lose people out the back door as we're bringing them in the front door. So once we defined our goals, being able to have actions under each of those goals for leaders, for employees, and then in particular for our Diversity Advisory Council and our network groups. The thing is the way that we approached it in the past was a little bit more focused on the burden being on the Diversity Advisory Council and the diversity network groups to do the work. Well, that's not going to change the culture, and it's not fair. And so back to how do we include all employees? So we've gotten very specific with our DEI 3-year strategic plan, and we lay out actions and expectations for each of those groups. And we've added metrics. Our executives, 10% of their bonus is focused on DEI. So, and there are very specific actions that they need to demonstrate to be able to meet that 10%. For our employees and our managers, again, those actions are woven into high potential development. It's woven into our succession process. Our succession process looks at the leadership pipeline, but we also have an expectation that women, minorities will, there'll be specific conversations to make sure we're not missing our great talent. The makeup of our leadership team, we have metrics around what our leadership team should look like. And in fact, as we look at, our board, what are we doing around diversity from a board standpoint? We're doing some of those metrics. We are able to pull internal reports that where managers can go in to their own data and look at their data to see how they're doing. But we also are running surveys, and those are, again, global surveys to be able to measure how our employees are feeling about DEI, but also to be able to make sure that we're making progress and people feeling like our culture supports that mutual respect.
Great, thanks, Sheri. I think it's obviously being intentional is important, but then going a step further and setting goals and metrics obviously is extremely important as well. And that's a nice transition back to Mark. How did you all decide on your diversity goals in terms of new hires, minority business spend? How did you determine what that percentage would be? And have they been effective in keeping the company accountable and focused on these goals?
Yeah, I think our goals have evolved over time. We continue to try to raise the bar there. It's, sort of decided by a joint effort. I mentioned Stan Williams and our economic inclusion department that we started in 2005. And that's a really big piece of it. Our HR department is as well. And then we've also developed, I think it was back in maybe 2009 or 2010, we've got a MWBE advisory committee that is made up of minority business leaders outside of our company. And we spend time with them just listening to their voice about what they would recommend from us. And it's really made a difference in our company, and they've been able to bring some things that have helped us. We've spent more than $1.6 billion with minority companies since 2005 when we got Stan and the company on board. I think having the goals just keeps us focused and accountable. Each region is more challenging than others. There's a lot of minority subcontractors and suppliers, and it's a little bit easier. I can tell you here in the Lexington region, it's a challenge for, we do complex commercial construction, and it's not easy. So, our percentage is maybe a little bit less than what some of the other regions are, and we're continuing to try to work and grow that. And the accountability piece, it's really just, making sure that we're holding each other accountable. So we track our results monthly and quarterly. We have a meeting. Each region has a meeting with our EI department, and we hold each other accountable to make sure that we're meeting percentages and goals that we set as a company, and it's something that's really important to us.
Thanks. Ray, Mark mentioned listening to minority-owned businesses. You're very involved with Commerce Lexington's Minority Business Accelerator program. What do you see as the biggest obstacles to minority-owned companies from participating in these public spending opportunities, and how can businesses in the community minimize those barriers?
Well, to spend in the public realm, it's very confusing, it's very daunting, and it's really built for established businesses. Now, most minority businesses or young entrepreneurs are emerging at best and not established. So the traditional barriers that you have are access to money, lines of credit, structural loans that are built into the RFP that they're bidding on. So you have those kind of entry issues that you have. You've got bonding issues. You've got staffing issues. You have insurance issues. All of these other things kind of pile up. So what we're trying to do is we're going through right now a structural class of 8 courses to really work through some of those barriers for companies. Because as they grow and develop, part of what Mark is doing and Toyota has done so well is an understanding that these companies are not established, they're emerging, so they need to work with a prime company or a lead company until they get a point of being established, where they have an HR department, an accounting department, where they can have people that can go out and write grants, people that are looking for the RFP opportunities. When most minority companies go after an RFP, that is their sole focus in how they're feeding themselves at that moment. And they don't really have the capacity, the ability to do 4 or 5 of those at the same time, so to speak. So building the capacity is the biggest challenge. How do we build an organization or a company to the point of where they can reliably staff? Because staffing is an issue. Staffing goes up and down based on their employment opportunities that they currently have. So the work that Sheri and Mark and Will have done in the past is very important to a company, because it helps them establish a baseline of how many employees they can carry, how many employees they can have, what are the real opportunities, and financially, will I be able to compete on this RFP bid process? Because once again, it comes down to how much of the work can I actually do, and how much am I subbing out some of that work, which adds to a non-competitive bid. So there's a lot of barriers. What we're trying to do is listen, as Mark said, a key point. We're trying to create class work through it, and we're really trying to create a process where we not only interact as Mark and Sheri and these companies do on the front end of the RFP. Commerce Lex and others are trying to interact on the back end to walk through the process. If you didn't get the RFP, what about it? Let's break down the process of where you were very weak and how can we support you in that process. So we're bringing banking relationships forward. We're trying to create creative lines of credit based on opportunity, and trying to create those relationships with companies so they can build themselves up from emerging to a level of established where they have some capacity.
Thank you. Will, you're kind of looking at things now from a different perspective as a co-owner of Jam Distribution. You've been certified as a minority business enterprise since 2007. What has been your experience in accessing information about public procurement opportunities and submitting bids? How are you seeing that process now from the other side?
You know, I just got a chance to take a look at some of the questions last night, and that question was particularly interesting for me because although JAM started in 2007, they really didn't start any heavy business until maybe 2017, and I joined in 2018. But we really haven't gone after any public, if you mean public, meaning city business or, organizations like that. We've been focused in the corporate space. We've been focused in the banking arena and things like that. So most of our work is more, again, corporate as opposed to public. And with that in mind, our quoting process or RFQ process is very similar. It's very mundane. It's very similar to any other business that you would do out there.
Does anything surprise you though, being on the other side? Anything that you wish you could have told yourself at Toyota that maybe you would have done a little differently?
I don't think so. One of the things that Toyota did a number of years ago that I think opened up, sort of speaking to what Mark and Sheri's talked to, but that sort of opened up the relationship with minority business enterprises was a program they have called the Opportunity Exchange. And the Opportunity Exchange is where we bring all of our tier 1 suppliers and we invite any minority business enterprise to come to the session and actually share what they're doing, share what their capabilities are, and try to make matches. That in concert with the targets that was set for minority business spend has Toyota spending over $3 billion a year now in the minority space. But I, as a member of co-owner of JAM, am now a supplier to Toyota, and we basically set that relationship up through the Opportunity Exchange and, of course, my knowledge of some of the people in purchasing. It's interesting how I got into that business. One of the most frustrating projects that I was engaged in those last 2 years that I was in Georgetown as president was our uniform program. Something as basic as getting a good, strong uniform supplier for our employees. And when the opportunity came forth for me to talk with some friends of mine who were the other owners of JAM, I told them about my frustrations around uniforms, and they talked about, well, why don't we get into that? Why don't we venture into that? So we did. We moved in that direction, and the majority part of our business as of last week was in uniforms, providing uniforms for corporations. Shell is a huge supplier of ours. Obviously, Toyota is, and many other businesses as well. Starting this week, we branched off into a new chapter. I won't get into that right now because it hadn't been formally announced, but the whole structure of working with Toyota was helpful in that I at least understood what they were looking for and what businesses look for, and was able to take that to JAM to help to expand our enterprise.
Great, thanks. Sheri, you touched a little bit in your early remarks on the Diversity Council. Where did that idea come from? And can you explain a little bit about its purpose, structure, and role, as well as a little bit about the diversity network groups?
The group really came together initially as a group of leaders who felt really passionate about diversity. And I'll give a shout out to our retired VP of HR at Lexmark, Sheri Isbell, because I think that she drove that very much into the culture, and with the executive team saying we have to support this. So in its in its beginning, it was really focused on a small group of leaders and the diversity network groups. As we've expanded our diversity network groups, which in some companies they call them employee resource groups or business resource groups, we now have 9. And there's those groups drive the employee conversation. We use them as focus groups to really understand, we've talked about policies, or, with social injustice in 2020, our Black employee group was just invaluable in how we dealt with what was going on in the community, what was going on at a national level, but how we communicated. What were the things that we need to be focused on? What were we missing? What did our Black employees need to hear from us to know that they had our support? So those network groups become the voice, but they also become a bit of the accountability. The Diversity Advisory Council is made up of the diversity network group chairs and the executive sponsor for each of those organizations. Our diversity network groups are located in different areas. So for instance, our Women at Work group, we have a group in Lexington, but we also have affiliate groups in Europe, in the Philippines, in Mexico. We have those groups, and they have one executive sponsor who is, of course, somebody at a high level. This year we branched out. One of our executive sponsors actually isn't in the US, they're in Europe. So again, another opportunity to get a different viewpoint. One of the executive sponsors, every 2 years, they're named as chair. And the advisory council listens to the information coming up from the different diversity network groups, but also interacts with the executive team, which I think is really important. The executive team is informed by the advisory council. We bring issues to them. We also bring expectations to them back to our 3-year strategic plan. The advisory council went to the executive team and said, we're going to be working on this. We need your commitment that at the point we complete it, that you will support it. Not really asking permission, but saying, we're going to do this, and we're going to give you the view of this community so that you can hear what we're saying and then commit to that. And so the idea that the goals really come from, the bottom up, even though in the end, the executive team is responsible for that commitment level. The Diversity Advisory Council meets 6 times a year. And our executive sponsors meet 3 times a year. I will tell you that we've met a lot more than that in 2020. But being able to have the hard conversations, we put on 3 different live events in 2020 focused on social justice. And the Diversity Advisory Council drove all of the infrastructure and the support for those events, and gave all employees an outlet for having conversations, how to be an ally, how does it feel on the other side. They are invaluable to us in understanding both what's going on within our business, as our business has had to shift its business model. What does that feel like? And how can we rally the community behind the people piece and the business piece?
Great, thanks. I'll throw this question out to anybody who wants to answer this, but you all represent businesses that do have a long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but some businesses, particularly maybe smaller businesses, want to do more, but they aren't certain where to start to have a positive impact. What would you say is a good first step to generating some good outcomes for a company in the DEI space?
I can start with that. I think, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, I think it starts with the top leadership and making sure the CEO, the executive teams, and senior management are brought in and really know how important it is to make sure you're having minority inclusion, and it's a passion for the company. And then sort of secondly, we're an employee-owned company, so And our company is based around growth from within. So most of our employees we hire right out of college. And that was the reason we started several years ago providing some scholarships for minority students, because we've seen how important that was and how much of a difference it could mean in bringing diverse students into our company. And as I mentioned, I think it is a challenge in the construction and engineering programs. But we've come a long way with that. And then maybe the last one would just be to lean on groups like the National Minority Supplier Development Council for support, because they've certainly supported us over the years.
Yeah, Carla, if I can jump in and maybe add a couple of comments. You know, last year, with all of the issues that we all had a chance to experience in this country, in addition to my role with JAM, I also serve on 3 corporate boards. So one of the first things that I did, and Jury Isabel, by the way, is on one of those boards with me. I'll tell her you said hello, Sheri. But one of the things that I did was I called all 3 of those corporate boards together, one by one, obviously, as a board, and I asked everybody on the board to just think about 3 things, and then let's get back together in our next board meeting and have a deeper discussion about it. And the first question that I posed to everyone there, the executive team and the members on the board, was, do you believe that institutional racism exists in America? And be honest, think deeply about it. Do you believe it exists? The second question I asked everybody to think about is, are we absolutely sure that our company's vision, policies, and practices are not a part of the problem? So let's go back and take a look deeply inside of our organization and find out, are we a part of the problem or not? You know, are we sure we're not a part of the problem? And then the third question is, you know, what are we willing to do to try to be a part of the solution? Because it's obvious with what we saw last year that there's still a tremendous gap in this country, and we're not able to utilize the talents of everyone. Everybody doesn't have the same equal opportunity. So what can we as an organization do to be a part of the solution?
And Carla, if I could piggyback on just 2 things that Will said that's critical there. There have been several studies that have kind of looked at the events that unfolded in 2020. One of the big ones was done by McKinsey and Company. And so you have to start with the fact of the knowledge base of a true understanding of DEI, and understanding that not only the companies that have strong departments are more efficient, they're more profitable. And we have conclusive data on Fortune 500 companies that the quartile that these companies sit in, or they are more profitable and produce more revenues. The second thing is, of Fortune 500 companies, only 73% of those companies came out with a strong DEI statement after the things that unfolded this past summer. So to Will's point, there are still companies out there not operating in truth and not understanding the fact that there is institutionalized racism that we have in a lot of our systems in the country. Now, when you do training, you can tell by the companies that train down and the companies that train up. When companies that have anti-racism training that goes straight up through the CEO and the board team, you understand the seriousness of the commitment and the understanding of the environment. But companies are not built to be placeholders in our communities. They're built to do the right thing and to help build the community out and not suck the community dry. And so that understanding of the partnership that they have to have inside of the community is critical. And you're looking at 2 companies here on this call that have been critical to the community of Lexington, and Will and his partnership with Toyota in Georgetown was very critical to the growth of our community. So it's all about what your perspective is, what your statements are, and how serious you are.
And if I could just mention one other thing, I think that's very clear, is you have to be serious. You can't put on a facade. You have to really be committed to standing by your guns, listening to employees, and not wavering in your commitment to DEI, because it calls for tough conversations. And if you say you're going to take a stand, then you need to do that. And if you decide that you want to play both sides, it doesn't end very well for the company. And it loses employee trust and it loses community trust.
I'm going to deviate from my list of questions for a minute and go to a question from one of the listeners, and it happens to be Jerry Isbell. So just to let you know, she's listening. But Ray, it kind of piggybacks to something that you've said. And her question is that many companies came out with statements around racial injustice, but how do these companies then ensure that there is follow through that is meaningful? So it's not just a tweet or a statement, but it leads to a change in behavior, a change in corporate behavior. And that's for Ray or anyone.
Well, real quick, because I don't want to dominate this one, but Carla, you said it already. You got to have metrics. All right. So your seriousness is measurable. And you have to be transparent in those metrics back to the community. So public organizations especially need to be able to communicate those metrics out into the community and not be embarrassed by the starting point, because what we're finding as we have dealt with public institutions here in Kentucky, Central Kentucky especially, the starting points are not great. We have goals, stated goals of 10% in a lot of the public entities, but the actual numbers are woefully below those goals. So you have to be but that transparency allows the community to partner with these organizations and hold them accountable. And as Mark said, that allows them to go back to that company to supply that company with the resources that they need. If the company is having a hard time or an issue or organization with finding in minority companies, we can open them up to opportunities and availability, like Will said, with opportunity exchanges, with Commerce Lex, with proven leaders, with Toyota and other proven leaders in the space. So it starts with transparency, and you have to get the metrics of where a company is in this moment in time.
Right. Ray, many companies tell us they have difficulty finding minority-owned businesses to bring into their procurement process. How do companies get started finding those minority-owned businesses? I know that Commerce Lexington has some resources, but how to just kind of step by step, where do I go? Who do I pick up the phone and call? What websites do I use? How do I get that ball rolling?
So one of the things that we're trying to do, and this is a real problem, this is not a made-up issue. One of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to get all of that information that everybody carries separately, put it all in one place. A published list of all the companies working in and around Central Kentucky in the different spaces that they work in. But not only get that list, get the list of their certifications. What are they certified to do? What are their bonding capacities? All of the things that you need to have to build out a real competent list. So we can take those companies with us when we go and we hear that, where are the companies? Where are the companies? Well, here they are. We don't have a ragged list of 50 from this organization, 25 from over here. Here's all of the companies. Now, COVID and the pandemic has helped a lot of companies come from the dark into the light and professionalize themselves. And so what we're offering is an opportunity to get the certifications at a reduced cost and create those relationships where people want to get certified. And then also bring them to the light when it comes to banking relationships, lines of credit, and those kind of things. So there's a lot of work to be done in that particular space. I would say reach out to those who are doing well, because if someone is doing well, they probably have a very good list of companies that they're working with. So if I was in the construction space, I would definitely want to talk to Mark about who are some of the folks Messer is doing business with.
And I'm guessing, Ray, that what's being compiled now will also help us know where the gaps are, in terms of not only will it provide a great list for businesses, but it'll show us where the gaps are and what we need to do to support some companies to be able to fulfill more of the contract opportunities that are out there.
Absolutely. And for better or for worse, the city has commissioned a disparity report that will tell us a lot about exactly where we are in this region with capacity with minority companies.
Can I add one small comment to that? one of the things that I also suggest that minority companies consider is to look around and look for opportunities to partner with other minority companies. I mean, sometimes if you don't have the staffing or you don't have the capital capacity to go after a large job by yourself, look for opportunities to work together to maybe expand an opportunity for both sides. And then through that opportunity, both organizations learn something and maybe get an opportunity to, continue on their growth panel from there.
Great point. Great point. And Mark just posted in the chat section, our existing list of minority owned and women owned members are listed in a resource guide, and there's a link to it in the chat section. I also wanted to ask a question that was submitted by another one of the listeners, and this is to any panelists. Could you give an example of a specific measure that you use for your leadership? I know Sheri mentioned compensation. I mean, it doesn't get much more attention getting than that, but what are maybe some other measurements that you use for leadership to determine whether your leadership and your organization is doing well in the DEI space?
Some very tactical things that we are telling our leaders that they need to be doing is being present at diversity events and being there and letting people see that you are there and you are focused on that, asking their management teams to also participate in events, being able to show that they are involved in the development of diverse talent. So who are you mentoring? From a development side, do you have development plans for your employees? We did training this year around unconscious bias, and we asked each of the managers to lead a conversation. We gave them a discussion guide and we pointed them to the learning, and we asked each of the managers to have those conversations with their teams, because we want to be able to start having conversations that don't always feel awkward. And we're only going to do that if we have the conversation, we start the conversation and we continue the conversation. On our survey side, one of the questions that we will have in our DEI survey later this year is your manager having DEI conversations with the team on a regular basis? So we're able to do the measurement, set the expectation, but also on the other side, measure whether our leaders are actually doing those things. Hiring's easy. You can look at hiring. Some of these things are a little harder to measure, but there are definitely ways that you can do that.
Next questions for any of the panelists. How can businesses create a culture that provides more minority men and women with opportunities to advance to supervisory and leadership roles within the companies? I think that's a big question that a lot of companies have in terms of, maybe you've done the work to recruit, but how do you retain? And how do you then build them up into moving up the ladder?
I can start on that with a little bit of what Messer does. I mean, first of all, it's got to be intentional. So coaching and mentoring is really important to us. And we have an expectation with our senior management group, and we've got an annual review process. And those folks are judged on how they are supporting specifically minority management folks. And then just recently, we got to look, and we've got approximately a company had about 500 craft employees. And when we started looking at our craft leadership, how many of those were minority, we were not very proud with it. So we've started what we're calling a craft force diversity leadership group. And each region has got some folks in that. And we're really trying to support those folks and give them the tools and mentorship that's going to grow them into our craft ranks of being foremen and give them more of an opportunity to be leaders in the company. And we're pretty excited about that. And we just started that last year, and it's going so well. We've now started a Messer Women in Construction group as well for the same purpose of trying to continue to grow women in our company both on the management and the craft side.
Yeah, I would just add, you've got talented minorities and women in your organizations that can handle leadership positions. The problem is in the past, there has not been movement in that area. So some of those talented employees don't necessarily believe that you're serious about having people to move there. So I would suggest that if you don't have diversity in your senior team, look for ways to get it. Obviously, a comfortable way to do it is to promote people from within, but sometimes you have to bring talent in from the outside. People need to see that you're serious about diversity and equity and inclusion by the leadership teams that you have. And it can take years to be able to only grow that strictly from promotion from internal. So I ask, if you're really serious about getting people anxious about the opportunity for promotional opportunities, because the talent is there, give them something that they can see to show that you're serious about it. And you'd be surprised the type of talent that comes forward out of your organizations.
Yeah, Carla, one more thing. I worked at WealthSouth corporate for a long time, and I was director of diversity there. And I would tell everybody, retention actually starts in the recruitment process, and it's a two-way street. And when a company is selling you on their wares, and they don't detail the depth of their diversity and inclusion program, that's telling. And you should be able to figure out if that's a company I want to be affiliated with or not. But retention starts in the recruitment process, and that's how you build overall retention in any organization. You are selling what you're all about, what your strategic and mission plan is all about, and inclusion and diversity should be part of that in the recruiting process. So I always caution people, when you're being recruited by a company, be sure that you're hearing everything and you're asking all the right questions. But most companies are pretty smart, and they know that starts really in the recruitment process. We're starting this whole retention deal when we're sitting down talking to an individual.
Great. I want to try and get into two more questions really quickly. One from my list and then one from somebody who's listening. But many of you have talked about the different network groups that you have for people of color, for women, for various issues. But how do you create space for and support and encourage people in marginalized groups as they assert and work to implement their visions of a world that might not necessarily align right now with the status quo? How do you give them that space and make them feel that they will be listened to and that they won't be penalized for that?
I think we've had some interesting conversations about inclusion and the idea that inclusion truly does mean that everybody, has that voice. And, we've had, to me, it goes back to the listening piece, is to, ensure a safe space to have conversations for, for a group to come forward and say, hey, we want to have a conversation because we feel differently about something that's going on. I'll give you an example, kneeling for the national anthem. And so, we had a conversation about that. Even within our diversity network groups, there was different feelings about that topic. And people said, I feel like I can't say what I think because I'm going to be judged. And just saying that and saying we have to model inclusive conversations, respectful conversations, and we may have to agree to disagree, but we respectfully listen to each other, giving people that space. And then you may have to have that conversation in a safe space and then find ways to go out and say, hey, we're having this conversation, but we want everybody included in the conversation. It's hard not to get emotional, and we should have emotion and passion for the things that we feel passionate about. We should also have ways that we have a conversation so we can really hear each other.
Can I follow up on that real quickly? You mentioned how in 2020 that was very important that you had these groups set up because they could kind of, you could listen to them and they were good sounding boards, and they brought up how they were feeling and in different issues. But how do you balance between empowering people to be heard versus maybe the exhaustion of, I'm tired of having to explain myself to you? Because that's something that I've heard too, is that if you're not getting it by now, why is it on my shoulders to have to try and explain to you what's going on?
One of the reasons that we held the live events that we did was because we heard very clearly from our Black employee group that they were tired. They had been explaining and had to keep explaining, and the burden did keep falling on their shoulders. And we wanted the rest of the Diversity Advisory Council to hear that, as allies to them. But we also tried to create other opportunities for questions to be answered in a way that it didn't fall to them. We actually brought in an external group to facilitate conversations. We had, again, encouraging managers to send people, to let people know that, people feel differently about answering questions. We have to be respectful. And I do think that that's something that we heard loud and clear. And so we tried to create alternate routes. We put out readings. We set, there were podcasts that were suggested that people thought were particularly helpful. And so we had a resource page where people could put resources. If you want to get information, here's where to go.
Great.
Very impressive, Sheri.
Great. I just want to get to this one last question from the listeners, and that is, when you're looking at diversity goals and you look at the number of minority-owned businesses that are out there, and you set a number to it, that's just looking at things as they are, when the potential for people who are minorities to have businesses is so much greater. There's potential for so many more people to become business owners. Will the current organizational goals for diverse business spending be enough for transformational change, or does it need to be even higher?
Let me just say this, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more that can be added by others, because I'm not in that corporate space anymore, about 3 years removed. But, we always looked at setting targets beyond where the population was. For example, in the state of Kentucky, if you have, 10% African-American population, or 13%, I think the last number I remember, you set your target beyond that. You set your target for 15. And then you can set an aspirational target for even higher. Because again, if you want to be a part of the solution, we need to recognize the part of the gap is because some of the issues that have happened before, and you want to be setting up a network or an opportunity to be able to expand it. But at least set your initial targets to match the population. Ray mentioned that sometimes when you open up the sheets, you'll find that you're far, far away from that. That's okay. It's okay. But the key is set it out there where that's at least fair. I mean, that's at least basic. Match the population as a starting point, and then you can go from there.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I know we've gone a little over, but it's been such an amazing discussion and great to have all of you together. So Ray, Mark, Will, Sheri, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And I think we can all walk away from this with some additional resources, and just realizing that listening, learning, and taking action are the steps we need to follow, and that it's continuous. We need to be continually looking at what we're doing and how we can be doing it even better. Thanks also to our presenting sponsor, WealthSouth, and all of our other sponsors, and to all of you out there, have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.